Howard gets it in, but it's knocked away by Lexie Hull. Hull with the steal. And the Indiana Fever, beset by major injuries all year long, are on the doorstep of making the semifinals.
7.4 seconds. That's all that was left. Not just in the game, but for a franchise that had been wandering in the wilderness for what felt like a lifetime. In sports, time can feel infinite, or it can feel suffocating. For the Indiana Fever, it was a vice grip. The air in Gateway Center Arena was electric, a roaring cascade of noise from nearly 4,000 Atlanta fans, all of them on their feet, sensing a victory that would exorcise their own demons and send Indiana home to yet another winter of what-ifs. You could feel the weight of history in that moment. 10 years. A full decade since this team had last won a playoff series. Every single second of that drought, every losing season, every missed shot, every hollowed-out locker room, it all seemed to converge on this single inbound play. The ball was in Ryan Howard's hands on the sideline, her eyes scanning the court for an opening, a sliver of space that would lead to the dagger. For Indiana, this was the precipice of a miracle or the confirmation of a curse. 6 players, including the most famous rookie on the planet, were gone, wiped out by a season of brutal injuries. They were running on fumes, a skeleton crew held together by sheer will and the faint echo of belief. Every player on that court, every fan holding their breath back home in Indiana, understood the stakes. This wasn't just about advancing to the semifinals. This was about proving that the last decade of pain was finally, mercifully over. This was about rebirth. And it all came down to one pass, one shot, and 7.4 seconds of suffocating pressure. To truly understand the gravity of that moment, you have to rewind. Not just to the start of the game, but all the way back to 2015. That was the last time the Indiana Fever meant something in the postseason. Tamika Catchings, a living legend, was still the heart and soul of the franchise, her relentless fire dragging the team to the WNBA Finals. It was a different universe. That team had an identity forged in toughness, a culture of winning that was simply expected. But after Catchings retired, that identity began to fracture, then crumble, then fade into a distant memory. What followed was not a rebuilding phase. It was a slow, agonizing descent into irrelevance. Year after year, the Fever found themselves at the bottom of the standings, their season ending not with a bang, but with the quiet melancholy of the draft lottery. They became a farm system for other teams' future success, a place where promising talent often struggled to find its footing before moving on. The losses piled up, becoming so routine that they lost their sting, replaced by a dull ache of resignation. The pride of a championship franchise had been eroded, replaced by the hope that maybe, just maybe, next year would be different. But it never was. Coaches came and went. Rosters were overhauled. Yet the results remained stubbornly the same. For the fans who remembered the glory days, it was a torturous watch. For the players who lived through it, it was a heavy burden, the weight of a losing culture pressing down on them every single night. This season was supposed to be the dawn of a new era. The arrival of Caitlyn Clark wasn't just a draft pick. It was a seismic event, a cultural shift that promised to drag the Fever back into the national spotlight. And it did. But fate had other plans. The basketball gods, it seemed, weren't done testing this team's resolve. One by one, key players started to fall. First, the veterans, the steady hands meant to guide the young roster. Then the role players, the essential glue that holds a team together. And finally, the unthinkable, Caitlyn Clark herself, sidelined, her record-breaking rookie season cut short. By the time the playoffs arrived, the Fever weren't just short-handed, they were decimated. 6 players? Gone. Think about what that means. You lose the scoring, the defense, the leadership, and the sheer depth required to survive in the WNBA playoffs. You're asking players who were supposed to be complementary pieces to suddenly become cornerstones. You're asking a team to find chemistry on the fly, to patch holes with whatever grit and determination they have left. Every single expert, every analyst, every betting line wrote them off. And why wouldn't they? They were walking into a do-or-die Game 3, on the road, against a healthy, hungry Atlanta Dream team, with a roster that looked more like a preseason squad than a playoff contender. This wasn't a David versus Goliath story. On paper, it was a foregone conclusion. A team this broken down had no business competing, let alone dreaming of a victory. But the story of this Indiana Fever team was never about what was written on paper. It was about what was etched into their hearts. A stubborn refusal to break, a collective fire that had been stoked by years of being counted out, and a burning desire to rewrite their own ending. They weren't just playing for a spot in the semifinals. They were fighting for the soul of their franchise. And so the game began, not as a clean slate, but as another chapter in a long, arduous struggle. The noise in Gateway Center Arena was a physical thing, a wave of sound that crashed over the Fever with every possession. From the opening tip, Atlanta played with the swagger of a team that knew they were supposed to win. They were faster, healthier, and fueled by the energy of their home court. In those early moments, you could see the cracks in Indiana's armor. A misrotation on defense, a forced shot on offense, a turnover born from the relentless pressure. The Dream's star, Ryan Howard, moved with a fluid grace, probing the lane and testing a Fever defense that was already stretched thin. For a few minutes, the narrative that everyone had written beforehand seemed to be playing out in real time. The undermanned, injury-riddled Fever were simply outmatched, destined to be a feel-good story that ultimately fell short. But then, the heartbeat started. A steady, defiant rhythm that refused to let the team flatline. That heartbeat was Kelsey Mitchell. No player on that roster understood the weight of the last decade better than her. She had lived it. She was drafted into the darkness, spending the prime of her career on teams that were perennial underachievers. She endured the losses, the coaching changes, the endless cycle of rebuilding. Lesser players would have demanded a trade, seeking greener pastures and a chance to win elsewhere. But Mitchell stayed. Her loyalty was a quiet anchor in a sea of instability. And in this game, with the season on the line, she played like a woman possessed. It wasn't just about scoring, it was a declaration. She decided that this story, her story, would not end in another quiet defeat. In the first half, she was a force of nature. Atlanta threw everything they had at her. They sent double teams, they hedged hard on screens, they tried to force the ball out of her hands. It didn't matter. Mitchell attacked with a controlled fury, a blur of motion that the Dream's defenders simply couldn't contain. She slithered through gaps that didn't seem to exist, her crossover a hypnotic weapon that left defenders flat-footed. When they sagged off, she pulled up and drilled jumpers with a shooter's pure confidence. When they crowded her, she blew past them, finishing at the rim with an acrobatic grace. 19 of her 24 points came before halftime, an offensive explosion that served as a lifeline for her team. She wasn't just keeping them in the game, she was carrying them, refusing to let the pressure or the noise break their spirit. Every bucket was a message: we are not going away. While Mitchell was the fire on the perimeter, Aaliyah Boston was the steel in the paint. Last season's Rookie of the Year had been thrust into an impossible position, asked to be the offensive and defensive anchor of a team without its generational point guard. Her matchup was a brutal one: the bigger, stronger Brianna Jones, a veteran who specialized in using her physicality to dominate the low block. From the opening possession, it was a war of attrition. Every rebound was a fight, every post-up a battle for inches. Jones leaned on her, pushed her, tried to impose her will through sheer force. But Boston never buckled. What she lacked in raw power, she made up for with intelligence and impeccable fundamentals. She used her footwork to gain position before the ball ever arrived. She used her timing to contest shots without fouling. She absorbed contact and remained perfectly balanced, her composure a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. Her box score was a testament to her versatility: 14 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists. But it couldn't capture the true essence of her performance. It couldn't quantify the number of times she altered a shot, the number of possessions she saved with a timely tap-out rebound, or the calming influence she had on her teammates. While the guards were scrambling and the crowd was roaring, Boston was the team's unwavering center of gravity. She was the anchor holding them steady in the storm, proving that leadership isn't always about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it's about being the strongest pillar. And then there was the wild card, Odyssey Sims. A late-season signing, a veteran journeyman who had been brought in as an insurance policy. Now, with the team in tatters, she was their starting point guard, tasked with navigating the offense through a sea of hostile defenders. Sims played with the aggressive, fearless edge of a player with nothing to lose. She attacked the rim relentlessly, a bowling ball of a guard who invited contact and lived at the free throw line. Her game wasn't always pretty, but it was profoundly effective. She broke down Atlanta's defense off the dribble, collapsing the paint and creating open looks for her teammates. Her 8 assists were a testament to her court vision, her ability to make the right play under duress. 16 points, a constant barrage of attacks on the basket. She was the jolt of energy they desperately needed, the unpredictable element that kept Atlanta's defense off balance. Her performance was a quiet masterpiece of professionalism, a veteran stepping into a chaotic situation and providing not just production, but stability and leadership. Together, this unlikely trio, the loyal veteran, the poised young star, and the journeyman leader, formed a resilient core. They were the reason Indiana was still standing as the game entered its final, heart-stopping stages. They had weathered the initial storm. They had answered every punch Atlanta had thrown. But the biggest test was yet to come. The game was tightening, and history was waiting for a hero. But a fire built by 3 players alone can easily be extinguished. For the Indiana Fever to survive the second half, the flames had to spread. The fight had to become a contagion, infecting every single player who stepped onto that floor. As Atlanta adjusted their defense, keying in on Mitchell and packing the paint against Boston, the game's complexion shifted. It was no longer a contest of individual brilliance, but a brutal test of collective will. This is where championships are forged and where underdog stories are born, in the quiet contributions of the players who don't make the headlines, but who do the dirty work that allows victory to become possible. And one by one, Indiana's role players answered the call, their efforts weaving together a safety net that refused to let the team fall. Natasha Howard was a phantom, a whirlwind of length and activity that seemed to be everywhere at once. She didn't need the ball in her hands to make an impact. Her presence alone was a disruptive force. She lived in the passing lanes, her long arms deflecting passes and turning what should have been easy Atlanta possessions into chaotic scrambles. She crashed the offensive glass with a relentless hunger, creating second-chance opportunities that felt like gifts from heaven for an offense that was struggling to find its rhythm. Howard's value couldn't be measured in points. It was measured in extra possessions, in hurried shots from the opposition, and in the infectious energy that comes from pure, unadulterated hustle. She was the team's engine, a player whose relentless motor set the tone for everyone else. If Howard was the engine, Brianna Turner was the chassis. A consummate professional, Turner was the backbone of Indiana's defense, the steadying force that held everything together. With foul trouble looming and exhaustion setting in, her minutes became absolutely vital. She played with a quiet intelligence that belied the roaring chaos of the arena. Her rotations were crisp and decisive, cutting off driving lanes before they could fully materialize. She communicated constantly, a defensive quarterback directing traffic and ensuring that everyone was in the right position. She wasn't a flashy shot blocker, but a master of verticality, challenging shots at the rim without fouling, forcing opponents into tough, contested looks. It was the thankless, blue-collar work that often goes unnoticed, but her teammates felt her impact on every single possession. She was their safety valve, the player who cleaned up mistakes and allowed the perimeter defenders to play with a higher level of aggression, knowing that Turner had their back. And then there was the spark plug, Aerial Powers. Her time on the court was limited, but her impact was explosive. She played with a kamikaze's disregard for her own body, diving for loose balls, battling through screens, and pushing the pace with a frenetic energy. You could feel the entire team's spirit lift when she checked into the game. The defense got a little louder, the bench became more animated, and the team's resolve seemed to harden. Her hustle was a shot of adrenaline, a reminder to everyone on that court what it means to leave everything you have on the floor. But while this collective heart was keeping the fever alive, one player was trapped in her own personal hell. Lexie Hull, the designated sharpshooter, couldn't buy a basket. For a player whose primary role is to space the floor and knock down open shots, it is the loneliest feeling in sports. Every time the ball left her hands, it looked pure. The rotation was perfect, the arc was true. And every time, the result was the same, a cruel clang off the rim, a tantalizing roll around and out. The frustration was visible on her face, a mask of disbelief she tried to hide from her teammates and her opponents. You could feel the weight of each miss piling on top of the last. A shooter's confidence is a fragile thing, and hers was shattering in the brightest spotlight of her career. The court, which once felt as wide as an ocean, was shrinking, the rim seeming to get smaller with every attempt. It would have been easy for her to fade into the background, to become a ghost on offense, afraid to shoot, afraid to fail again. But she didn't. While her shot betrayed her, she refused to betray her team. She channeled her frustration into a ferocious defensive effort. She hounded Ryan Howard, fought over screens, and battled for every inch of position. She kept herself engaged, kept herself in the fight, waiting, hoping for one chance, just one, to redeem a night that was slipping into a nightmare. Her struggle was a silent, agonizing subplot to the game's roaring drama, a personal battle that would ultimately set the stage for the most defining moment of her life. And so, the game arrived at its destination, the final 2 minutes. All the individual heroics, the collective grit, the silent struggles, it had all led to this. A one-possession game. The Gateway Center Arena was a cauldron of noise, the Atlanta fans on their feet, their voices a single, deafening roar. Every dribble echoed like a gunshot. Every pass was fraught with peril. This was the moment where seasons are defined, where legacies are made or broken. The Fever had clawed their way back, they had weathered the storm, they had answered every question about their heart. But now, they needed a hero. They needed someone to step out of the chaos and seize the moment. And as the clock bled down, the ball would soon find the hands of the one player who needed that moment the most. With the game hanging by a thread, Indiana trailed by 1. The clock was their enemy, every tick a hammer blow of pressure. Kelsey Mitchell, who had been their heart all night, slashed to the rim, her trademark burst of speed drawing the gravity of Atlanta's entire defense. She finished a layup, keeping the Fever breathing. Atlanta answered, pushing the lead back to 2. The next possession felt like the last. The ball moved with a desperate energy, swinging from player to player, searching for a crack in the defense. It whipped around the perimeter, a blur of motion, until it found its way into the hands of Lexie Hull. She was standing alone on the wing. For a moment, time froze. This was the shot. The one every player dreams of and dreads in equal measure. All the frustration, all the misses, all the self-doubt from the entire game rushed into that single moment. She could have hesitated. She could have passed it up, deferred to someone else, anyone else who wasn't mired in a shooting nightmare. But she didn't. In that split second, she chose courage over fear. She rose up, her form as perfect as it had been on every previous miss, and let it fly. The entire arena held its breath, a collective silence falling as the ball arched through the air. It was a perfect, beautiful parabola that ended with the softest, most satisfying whisper as it splashed through the net. It wasn't just a three-pointer, it was an exorcism. It was oxygen for a team that was suffocating. It put Indiana in the lead, but more than that, it was the sound of a player reclaiming her confidence at the exact moment her team needed it most. But the fight wasn't over. Atlanta had one last chance. 7.4 seconds. Ryan Howard took the ball on the sideline, ready to trigger the inbound play that would decide the season. The noise was deafening, a physical wall of sound pressing in. But Lexie Hull was no longer hearing it. The shot had changed everything. She was no longer the player struggling with her shot. She was a defender locked into the moment with preternatural clarity. She wasn't watching the ball. She was watching her opponent's eyes. She saw the glance, the subtle telegraphing of the pass before it ever happened. She saw the play unfolding in her mind a fraction of a second before it unfolded on the court. and she reacted without hesitation. It was a single, explosive movement, a fearless launch into the passing lane. She didn't just deflect the pass, she ripped it out of the air, a clean, decisive interception that was as much a display of intelligence as it was of athleticism. It was the steal. The game-saving, series-clinching, curse-breaking play that ripped the heart out of the Atlanta Dream and sent a shockwave through the entire WNBA. That single act of defensive brilliance was the signature on a masterpiece of resilience. Odyssey Sims would seal it with a free throw, but the story was already written. The frustrating night of missed shots had miraculously transformed into the single greatest moment of Lexie Hull's career. Her journey through the game, from personal failure to ultimate redemption, was the perfect metaphor for the Indiana Fever's journey through the last 10 years. When the final buzzer sounded, the dam of emotion broke. A decade of waiting, of frustration, of being the league's forgotten team, all of it vanished in an eruption of pure, unadulterated joy. Players collapsed into each other's arms, their faces a mixture of disbelief and ecstatic relief. Kelsey Mitchell, the loyal soldier who had seen the worst of it, finally allowed herself to smile, a wide grin of profound satisfaction. Aaliyah Boston, the quiet leader, had tears streaming down her face as the weight of the moment washed over her. And Lexie Hull clutched the game ball like a sacred artifact, the hero of a story that seemed too improbable to be true. In the locker room, the celebration was a release. It was for every player who wore the uniform during the lean years, for a fan base that never lost faith, and for a roster that had every excuse to fold but simply refused. This win wasn't a fluke. It was the birth of an identity, a testament to the idea that heart, grit, and an unbreakable belief in each other can overcome even the most insurmountable odds. A team devastated by injury, playing on the road, had stared into the abyss and not only survived, but emerged stronger, tougher, and more united than ever. They were no longer the Indiana Fever of old. They were a force to be reckoned with, heading into the semifinals to face the titans of the league, the Las Vegas Aces. And for the first time in a very long time, they believed they belonged.